How many times does a satellite travel around Earth in one day? The answer could be anything from 16 times to twice, or once, or even less than once. And it all has to do with how high the satellite's traveling around the planet. Let's start with something familiar, GPS. Every time your phone determines your location, it's listening for precisely timed radio signals that are transmitted from navigation satellites. But your phone isn't downloading maps directly from those satellites. It's actually using the amount of time that it takes for that signal to get from the satellite to your phone to calculate your position on the planet. GPS satellites orbit at approximately 20,000 kilometers above the planet, or about 12,500 miles. And at that altitude, each satellite completes about 2 orbits per day. Now compare that to the International Space Station. The ISS travels above Earth at about 400 kilometers, or around 250 miles. Because it's much closer, it experiences a stronger pull from gravity, and so it has to move a lot faster to stay in freefall, or to stay in orbit. One ISS orbit takes about 90 minutes, and so it travels around Earth roughly 16 times every day. So the farther away a satellite is, the longer it takes to orbit the planet. A satellite that's positioned 35,000 kilometers above Earth can take roughly a day to complete one orbit. If it's positioned over the equator and it's traveling eastward at the same rate that the Earth rotates, then it will remain over the same general area over the equator the entire time. This is what we call a geostationary orbit. Many weather and communication satellites use this type of orbit so that they can monitor and communicate with the same part of the Earth continuously. There are a lot of different orbits that we use that are designed for different purposes. For instance, military or scientific satellites often travel over different parts of the planet and at different heights than for more familiar applications. Astronomy satellites can also use very different orbits. For example, the Hubble Space Telescope is positioned in an orbit where it circles the Earth roughly 15 times a day, whereas a telescope like the James Webb Space Telescope is put into a very specialized path where it doesn't even orbit the Earth at all. So to determine how many times a satellite can travel around the Earth in a day, we have to know a lot of information about its orbit, mainly its altitude. And depending on that altitude, the answer can be very different. And that's largely because the orbital altitude changes the length of the path that it must travel, and therefore the speed that it must travel at in order to remain in free fall and not fall back into the planet.